Hi, Phoebe. Yeah, find your name tag. I think you're over there. Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'll call the meeting to order. My apologies for being a minute or so late. We had a Montana Community Foundation meeting this evening. I'll refrain from appealing one more time for a return to a civilized hour of meeting. You can forget that I said that. Are there any changes to the minutes of the last meeting? If not, we'll accept the minutes as presented. The record will show that all of the council members are in attendance. We have a number of public hearings this evening. The first is a joint hearing with the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board, but since I think we don't have a quorum yet of the Planning Board, we may go on and have one or two of our other hearings and then come back to that if that's all right. We have a hearing on resolution of intention number 5578 to close and vacate a portion of Cedar Street and Hillsdale Drive adjacent to lots 1 through 4 of Block 2 and Lot 24 of Block 3, McCormick number 2. This is in Section 21, Township 13 North, Range 19 West. Is there a staff report? Mr. Bender.
Bruce Bender, City Engineer. Basically, I have a summary of comments as developed by Carla Kraus, Development Coordinator, and then Jeff Badnock can fill in on from the MRA's perspective on this. This right-of-way vacation concludes a riverfront trail access project in this area. The property owner of lots 1 through 4, Block 2 in the McCormick Addition, number 2, have agreed to grant an easement to the city allowing public access to an existing levee maintenance easement if the right-of-way vacation is successful. Utility and service companies and city staff were surveyed for comments or recommendations. U.S. West Communications, Montana Power have existing utilities occupying portions of the right-of-way proposed for vacation. As long as easements for the repair and maintenance of these utilities remain in place, under any resolution to vacate, these companies have no problems. So based upon the above information, the conditions being asked for under this vacation are: within 90 days of the council adopting a resolution to vacate, the owners of lots 1 through 4, Block 2, McCormick number 2, execute an easement allowing public access over and across the existing levee maintenance easement as described in Book 228 on page 19 of Missoula County Clerk and Recorder's micro records. Number 2, that all existing utility easements remain in force in effect for the repair, replacement, and maintenance of all existing utilities in the right-of-way being vacated. Basically, this is a tribute to the MRA staff, I guess especially to Carrie Nelson, and that we tried to arrange this or make this arrangement a few years ago and never were successful, but with her diligence, she's worked out this arrangement, and I think Jeff can give us a little bit more in the background on it.
Mr. Badnock.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as Bruce said, Carrie Nelson from the MRA staff has been working not only with Mrs. Drogitas, the owner of the property, but with Helen Curris, a citizen who has been extremely helpful in helping the staff communicate with Mrs. Drogitas about this issue. This is a section of the Riverfront Trail that we've been working on for quite some time to assemble enough property to do this stretch of trail. It's between Burton Street and Russell Street along the riverfront, and it will provide a necessary link in our riverfront trail system, and will connect the trail system with the California Street area, which will be looked at sometime soon, I'm sure, for a bicycle pedestrian bridge. But this is a very important link in the trail. One of the things that we've done in this is that we have reserved a 20-foot strip in the area that we're asking the council to vacate of Hillsdale, which if in the future we wanted to provide bicycle and pedestrian access to the trail from the Broadway area, we will have reserved that. We don't imagine that the city will ever want vehicular access to this part of the trail, but in the past we've observed that sometimes the city vacates more of the street than it wants to, and years later tries to get it back at expense. We've reserved this. In addition to our work with Mrs. Drogitas, we've also been in contact with Mr. Barth, the property owner on the other side of the vacated street. Mr. Barth has had an encroachment with his home on city right-of-way for a number of years, and that's been dealt with through a city encroachment permit. By this vacation, we will actually put his home back on his own property. In other words, as the street is vacated, his home will no longer encroach on the city property, and then he can start paying taxes on that. But I'll answer any questions I can for anybody who has questions.
Are there any
about
questions
this
for
vacation.
Jeff? Ms. Rosenleaf?
I'm looking at this map. Do you have?
I've got it
You're
embedded
familiar?
in my head.
So the house that encroaches on the city right-of-way, is it on this lot 24, or is it?
It would be on the east side of Hillsdale. That would be Mr. Barth's residence. Yes.
Okay. And so I can see where it's sitting out across this line here, so that's going to become
That is
his
correct.
property?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks. Is there any further testimony on this matter? Further testimony? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Ginny, I'm counting on you to tell me when you're ready to go.
We have not got our quorum. I'm sorry, we haven't got our quorum yet.
All right. We'll proceed then with the public hearing on resolution of intention number 5577 to close and vacate Balwer Street between School 5 Acres Tract 29 and School 5 Acres Tract 42 north to the Northern Pacific Railway Company right-of-way. This is in Section 16, Township 13 North, Range 19 West. Staff report, Mr. Bender.
Bruce Bender, City Engineer. Again, this is a summary report developed by Carla Kraus, Development Coordinator. Basically, this area is on the west side of Missoula. It's situated adjacent to the Burlington Bean Railroad area, and it's approximately 5 to 6 blocks east of Russell Street. So you're talking about this area that it's basically vacant property. This portion of Bulwer Street right-of-way is situated between Cowper Street on the west and Burton Street on the east, Cooley Street on the south, and the Northern Pacific or BN Railroad right-of-way on the north. So it sits right next to the BN right-of-way there at a triangular area. Utility and service companies and city staff were surveyed for comments. U.S. West Communications requests that any existing utility easements remain in place as long as easements for repair and maintenance of the utilities remain in place on the resolution to vacate. U.S. West has no problems. City staff requests the property owner tract 29 school 5 acres addition install appropriate curbing adjacent to the development plan for the tract and the vacated right-of-way. Since paving is intermittent or non-existent for this area and public sanitary sewer is currently unavailable, staff also recommends that the owner of tract 29 waive the right to protest the creation of any potential paving or sanitary sewer SIDs for this area. Based on the above information, the conditions being asked under this vacation are within 2 years the owner of such tract install the appropriate curbing adjacent to the vacated right-of-way along with the proposed development. And that number 2, that the owner of tract 29 waive the right to protest the creation of any potential special improvement districts for street paving or extension of public sanitary sewer to the area. Number 3, that all existing utility easements, including but not limited to the U.S. West Communications line, remain in force and effect for the repair, replacement, maintenance of all existing utilities and right-of-way being vacated. Additionally, these 2 streets that basically serve this particular piece of property, which would be Bulwer and Cooley, neither one of those are paved, but they are on our list of CMAQ streets to be improved. So by requiring this tract to waive its right to protest an SID in the future, then when we bring in the CMAQ projects on this property here, that this particular property will have to pay its proportionate fair share of the curb and sidewalk if required adjacent to its property or portions of this area. We were concerned that this streets adjacent to it are not improved public street improvements, but we feel that with his waiver that will leave open the door, but additionally that the CMAQ projects, since they're online and would hopefully have those done within the next 2 years, that would solve that problem for those 2 adjacent streets to this area. As we'd mentioned before, he submitted a proposal for development, and basically had a proposal for storage, private storage, and then also for some sort of shop complex. And that would enable him to develop this. Well, actually, these 2 shops would not be on the vacated right-of-way, but what his proposal is to use the vacated right-of-way as a parking area, and then it would potentially open up that area for some future development.
Ms. Rosenleaf?
Does the same person own lot 42 and the development is actually going to occur on 42?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't own.
Okay, because it looks like the railroad tracks run through lot 29, is that correct?
Okay, I'm not block. Which one now?
I thought you said it was lot 29 we were talking about.
Okay, yeah, tract 29 is what that's called.
Okay, but
And it's
the railroad runs right through the middle and they essentially own the little triangle
yeah,
pieces
they just
on
own,
either
all they
side?
own is that little piece of triangular property. That's right at the corner.
On this side here, and then
Yeah.
the development will occur on that triangle and the vacated street.
Yes, the triangular piece would have development on it, and then the piece adjacent to that would also have the previous, actually tract 29 is the previous vacated Cooley Street and that triangular piece. He must have brought those together with a COS or whatever. see that portion of coulee is vacated there, yeah, and then that triangular piece. That's what he owns. He doesn't own any of the platted lots in Block 64, but he does own that portion, and then that's what he's proposing to develop, would be the triangular portion, vacated coulee and that triangle, and then this proposed vacation area, he's just planning to develop it with a parking lot. I guess I'm sitting here, as I'm talking, I'm realizing that one of the conditions, obviously, that we would want to bring on this, that Carla doesn't have listed, is that obviously the vacation is following this site plan, because that was one of the critical elements that we were bringing forth, is that we don't vacate just to vacate, but that the vacation has a specific site plan to it. So I would think we'd want to consider that in our action tomorrow in committee, that we would condition that there be a development at this site as he's proposing. Because I don't think you want to just vacate this and have it not develop. We've always had that condition.
Ms. Rosenleaf.
Does the site plan include a paved parking lot?
Yes, it would. It would have to meet all current regulations. Yeah, we would want to put that in there, but that's required anyway by our current regulations.
Any other questions for Bruce? Thank you. Is there any further testimony on this matter? If there's not, we'll close this public hearing. Our final hearing is on a request by Peterson Development Company to rezone property located on Brooks Street near Schilling, described as lots 10 and 11, and portions of lots 12, 15, 16, and 17, Block 69, Norman's Edition. The requested zone change is from C commercial to C with a CLB overlay zone. That's commercial on-premises liquor and beer establishment district. Staff report, Ms. Dixon.
Good evening. My name is Jenny Dixon with OCD. Staff is recommending that this rezoning request be approved subject to the following conditions. Number one, the boulevard area along Brook Street and McDonald Avenue shall be landscaped with lawn or vegetative ground cover and shall include street trees at an average of 25 feet on center. Parking shall not be permitted within the boulevard. Number two, at least 10% of the total lot area to be developed shall be landscaped, which is approximately 4,908 square feet. Of this 10%, an amount of landscaping equal to 5% of the parking area shall be placed within the parking area. Number three, the applicant owner shall install a boulevard sidewalk along Brook Street. And number four, the applicant owner shall install curb and curbside sidewalk along McDonald Avenue. This property is currently vacant land, and it's located on the north side of Brook Street. An irrigation ditch cuts through the property, and preliminary site plans indicate a restaurant and several parking spaces on the west side. And there's a aerial photograph in front of me here. And additional parking on the east side of the property, which will be accessed by a vehicle bridge that crosses the irrigation ditch. Surrounding land uses and zoning are commercial, and there's a CLB overlay on the property adjacent to the west, which is Godfather's and the Speakeasy Lounge. The reason for the request is to permit the consumption of alcohol on the premises, as the applicant plans to construct a restaurant called Jake's Supper Club on this property. State law allows up to 20 gaming machines in conjunction with a liquor license. The application did not indicate the number of gaming machines proposed for this site, if any. OCD has received no written public comment to date, and there was no testimony at the Planning Board public hearing. The Planning Board voted 5-0 to recommend approval of the request, subject to the 4 recommended conditions. And that concludes my staff report.
Are there any questions for the staff? Mr. Sweet.
I just want to see if I understand condition number 2. Approximately 245 square foot of the parking area within the parking area will be landscaped?
Well, are you taking 5% of 4,908?
I was taking 10% of the 4,908 and then cutting that in half again.
Okay. The lot area is 49,000 square feet. So that 4,908 square feet is the amount of landscaping on site required. And the amount that goes in the parking area is determined by the size of the parking area. If the parking area were 1,000 square feet, let's say, 5% would be 50, I think, 50 square feet. dispersed throughout the parking area. And that can contribute to the 4,908 square feet.
Councilman Sweet, do you have a license to practice mathematics?
I haven't got a license to practice anything, except a fishing license.
And no worms, I understand. Any other questions for Jenny? Thank you. Is there anyone here to testify on behalf of Peterson Development Company? It's not necessary that there should be. I was just
Right.
asking.
I'm not speaking on behalf of Peterson, but I know that John Kellogg was planning to be here, and it may just be the switching around of the agenda.
Okay. Well, is there anyone else who would like to testify on this matter? Without objection, we will hold the hearing open, and just in case anyone shows up by the time we get to the end of the public hearings, and somebody remind me if need be to come back and close this hearing before the evening is over. I think we need to go on with our consolidated hearing. It seems unlikely that we'll find more members.
The planning board meetings are normally at 7:30, and there's a possibility, somewhat remote, that planning board members are looking at that time. But we can begin a public hearing without the quorum. We can ask questions, but we will not be able to take a vote and make a recommendation this evening.
I wouldn't necessarily expect that would need to happen. Maybe we can spend just a minute or two here talking about the procedure. In general, we have hearings before the planning board in advance of matters coming before the council so that we have the benefit of recommendations from the planning board. Let me ask, first of all, the planning board's wishes with regard to this matter. Do you want an opportunity to, after you hear it this evening, to consider it and make a recommendation to the council?
I believe that would be appropriate. However, I don't think we need to make the council wait until they receive our recommendation. The planning board has sent matters on in the past without a recommendation.
But it seems to me that ideally, if you're going to make a recommendation, that it should be before the council acts. Is there urgency? What is the state of urgency of action here? Barb, can you tell us that?
Barbara Martins with the Office of Community Development. There is no time frame on when a decision needs to be made, so if it would go back to the next planning board meeting on June 6th for a recommendation to full council, we could bring it to PAZN council after that planning board meeting if that's what the council and board chooses to do, because there's no time frame.
Thank you. Let's go ahead then and try to give ourselves a few more minutes on the 7:30 theory here, and perhaps we'll skip down to the consent agenda and take that up if there's no objection from the council. Chuck?
There are 14 items on the consent agenda. The first is with a quorum not present, agree to donate Lot 21 in Hillview Heights number 7 to the Missoula Housing Authority for $1 contingent upon MHA's building HUD-defined affordable housing on the lot. Otherwise, MHA would have to come back to the city for permission to use the lot in a different manner. Second, adopt a resolution of intention to declare certain City of Missoula property radios as surplus and authorizing its transfer to Missoula County, Animal Control and Sheriff, and to Sentinel High School. Third, adopt a resolution transferring appropriations within and among expenditure classes for the fiscal year 1994 budget. Fourth, adopt a resolution approving journal vouchers number JV-23T, JV-94-24T, JV-94-54F, JV-94-55F, JV-94-56F, JV-94-57F, JV-94-58F, JV-94-59F, JV-94-62F, and authorizing the transfer of any funds required by said journal vouchers. Fifth, with a quorum not present, approve the renewal of a one-year Rattlesnake Corridor lease with Helen Chipolato for $150. Sixth, in accordance with Section 12.12.015 Missoula Municipal Code, grant the request for postponement of the curb and sidewalk construction adjacent to Rowdy's Cabin, 4852 North Reserve Street by Gary Lokay. Seventh, in accordance with Section 12.12.015 Missoula Municipal Code, grant the request to postpone the curb and sidewalk requirements for 2850 Stockyard Road until a comprehensive curb and sidewalk plan is proposed in the area. Eighth, grant a temporary 10-foot right-of-way encroachment permit at 2850 Stockyard Road for extension of the parking area. 9, authorize the mayor to sign the development and construction agreement with the Montana Department of Transportation for the Community Transportation Enhancement Program, CTEP, fund project for the historical Missoula Millstone and Marker project in the amount of $37,710. 10, authorize the mayor to sign the amendment to the engineering services agreement for SID 505 with WGM Group for the amount of $74,774. 11, grant a permanent right-of-way encroachment permit for the existing barn building occupying the 39th Street right-of-way until the barn is removed, and a temporary fence encroachment for the fence also occupying the 39th Street right-of-way to the owner or owners of Lot 18 of the Silverwood subdivision. 12, pass a resolution declaring it to be the intention of the City Council to close and vacate 57 feet of Dakota Street adjacent to lots 13 to 24 of Block 15 in the Eddy Addition in Section 21, Township 13 North, Range 19 West, and set a public hearing for June 20th, 1994. 13, authorize the mayor to sign the CTEP agreement for construction and maintenance with the Montana Department of Transportation for the Ice-T Enhancement Fund project for the West Broadway sidewalks in the amount of $324,000. 14, award and authorize the mayor to sign the contract with Power Engineering Contractors Incorporated for the installation of interior lining to the Missoula wastewater treatment plant's secondary anaerobic digester and sludge holding tank in the amount of $378,000.
Are there any items to be returned to the regular agenda? Mr. Sampson.
Yes, item number 2, I'd like to have back to A&F. We're going to redivvy the radios.
So we'll take up with it on the regular agenda, is that right? Okay. Any other items, Mr. Bennett?
Number 9, please.
Any others? We'll vote then. Well, before we do that, we do have some resolutions. Items 3, 4, and 12 are resolutions. Is there any public comment on those resolutions? Seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote on items 1, 3 through 8, and 10 through 14.
Bennett.
Yes.
Craig. Yes. Gingarelli. Yes. Harrison.
Yes.
Hermes.
Yes.
Horton.
Yes.
Reedy.
Yes.
Rosenleaf. Yes. Sampson.
Yes.
Shea.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
Tracy.
Yes.
Consent agenda passes 12-0.
We'll revert now. We'll revert now to the zoning hearing which we held open on the request by Peterson Development Company. I see that Mr. Kellogg is here. Mr. Kellogg, do you want an opportunity to address the council?
I appreciate your holding that open for us. Basically, we would like...
John,
Yeah,
can
my
you
name is
identify?
John Kellogg, Kellogg from Professional Consultants. As I stated before the planning board meeting, we're in agreement with the recommendations of the planning staff. We believe this is an appropriate location for a CLB overlay, and if you have questions, Scott Peterson and I are here to answer them.
Any questions for John? Thank you very much. Is there now anyone else who would like to testify on this matter? If not, then we will close the public hearing. We will proceed to the joint public hearing of the Missoula City Council and the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board to review and adopt revisions to the Missoula City subdivision regulations, and I will co-chair this with the chair of the Planning Board, Ginny Cass. Could we have a staff report, please? Ms. Martins.
For the record, my name is Barbara Martins with the Office of Community Development. Tonight, as the mayor said, is a joint public hearing between City Council and the Planning Board to discuss proposed amendments on Phase 2 of the city subdivision regulations. As you may remember, last fall, the City Council adopted Phase 1 revisions to the city subdivision regulations, as was required by changes to Montana law. After that time, the city received model subdivision regulations from the State Department of Commerce, and tonight the staff of OCD is proposing to integrate some of the portions of the state model regulations, which is this copy here, and you've received a draft in the past, to take certain portions of the model regulations and to incorporate those into our current regs as Phase 2. The proposed changes within the document, the blue copy, are shown as red line portions of the draft regs. A summary of the proposed changes and a notice of this public hearing was mailed to over 200 agencies. Those included subdivision reviewing agencies, property owners, associations, developers, surveyors, land planning consultants, and other interested parties. A legal ad was also placed in the Missoulian. A work session was held Monday, May 16th, to discuss the proposed revisions. One person attended the work session. I might add those similar revisions as what's proposed before you tonight were proposed for the county subdivision regulations, which were adopted by the commissioners earlier this year, and a lot of these issues were discussed with different interested parties at that time. On May 6th, you received a letter from myself detailing a summary of the proposed changes to each article within the regulations. In addition, there are minor changes in organization, grammar, and style that were not detailed in that summary. On May 20th, a second letter was sent to you regarding comments received by staff with additional amendments proposed as a result of this input. To date, I have received comments from the city attorney, city engineer, city fire chief, and the president of the planning board. Also, Pete Meehan and Steve Meismer of the Building Inspection Department commented after this mailing went out on Friday, and their comments are on the desk before you. They're written on my May 20th memo. As previously discussed, there will also be a Phase 3. Phase 3 looks towards adopting amendments that were not addressed in either our current regs or the state model regulations, or were not adequately addressed in either of those documents. Amendments for Phase 3 could include standards for bikeway, walkways, for fire protection, for street standards, for areas of a riparian resource, for open space, hillsides, affordable housing, for redefining rural and urban subdivisions, etc. I'd like to take just a brief moment to summarize the proposed amendments before you tonight. If anyone would like to see a copy of the proposed changes, there are copies of the proposed regulations and my memo on the table over by the door. To begin, Article 1 is general provisions. This article adds several additional general purpose provisions. We've also added an amendment provision. The jurisdiction provision within this section has also been expanded to include the statutory language. In Article 2, which is definitions, there have been several changes which are recommended to the definition section. Some of these changes provide consistency with the statutory definition, and some provide consistency throughout the regulations themselves. Article 3 is subdivision design standards. The general design standards are more detailed when they refer to property that has special hazards. In addition, the standards for roads and streets are more detailed. This is an attempt to require the regulations from what is currently imposed by or recommended by the city engineer. It's the belief that if the standards are in the regulations, when someone new starts into the process and sees what the requirements are, it's better if they know those up front rather than when they first meet the surveyors. There's new sidewalk and driveway standards included. While the revisions do not follow the model regs precisely, the concept of flexibility and considering each subdivision individually is reflected. Our current regulations simply do not address any standards for condominiums. The new language comes directly from the state model regulations. Our current standards for mobile home parks, and that term should be updated to reflect manufactured housing, communities, and recreational vehicle parks, exceeds the standards that we found in the model regs. We require more space between each unit and greater setbacks from major streets and industrial areas. The argument that was in the model regs for lesser space was to conserve the use of land and to make these places more affordable to build and to use for living space. On the flip side, though, there's also a strong argument that the lesser setbacks take away from the quality of life in these communities. We are looking to research this subject more and would appreciate any input that you might have in this area. The section on PUDs includes more detailed submittal requirements and slightly more stringent qualification requirements. In Article 4, subdivision application and review procedures, the first changes to the submittal requirements are the extension of the time limits for OCD to certify a packet and for the agency to review the submittals. We've attempted to have the times reflect reality and to show the agencies, and to allow the agencies to do a meaningful review, which might include site visits. We are hoping that this will avoid situations where the agencies comment well after the packet has been prepared for the planning board and or the council. The next change involves the effective period for plat approval. This is slightly more specific than state law, which allows approval for a period of 1 to 3 years and allows for an extension of no more than 1 year. Our requirement allows an initial approval of 1 year with extensions which would go no longer than 3 years from the initial approval date. It does allow developments to come in with a specific phasing plan which could be approved by council to allow a longer period of time. It also puts in a provision that should the time frame go longer than 3 years, the council does have the authority to impose new conditions when the phases come in beyond those 3 years if we have new regulations in place. Article 5, regarding submittal requirements, we've added some requirements for contents of covenants and property owners associations. There's a new provision for expedited review of some subdivisions within this section. The expedited review idea come from the model regs, but we have changed some of the language. The concept is something similar to a certificate of survey process where it goes through some review, not as much as a standard subdivision because the impacts are so minimal. There would also be a possibility that some of the subdivisions would be subject to less restrictive design standards. The model regulation provisions for subdivisions created for lease or rent have been incorporated into this set also. Article 6, which deals with variance and vacation of recorded plats, there's additional findings for granting a variance which have been added, including one that would provide for energy savings, and there's a procedure for obtaining a variance. Article 7, error correction and adjustment procedures of recorded plats. This section is only modified to provide a cost for going through the process of error correction or plat adjustment. And then moving on to Appendix 2, which is the environmental and community assessment. Here, the main changes are that we've added street standards that we had discussed earlier in the memo, and we've added some language from the model regs regarding fire and emergency services and the impacts on local services. Under Appendix 4, Public and Private Improvements Agreement, we've added a provision which allows the city to take property as security for improvements guarantee. And once again, I'd just like to call your attention to the May 20th memo, which also suggests additional amendments to what was proposed in the blue draft. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Mr. Sampson?
I've had a couple of questions, and I'd like to ask a couple of questions on Article A exemptions. Are the exemptions that are listed in here primarily those exempted by state law? Is that the reason they're there?
Yes, they're all in state law. And this Article 8 was not changed in any way for this phase.
Okay, so anything that was divided prior to July 1 of 1974 does not come under any of these new regulations, so to speak. Does that mean that people who subdivided prior to 1974 can go ahead and build on those properties without further review?
If the parcel's already been created, then they can come in and apply for a permit to build on that. There's other regulations that may come into play, health department requirements, building standards, and this type of thing. If I'm understanding, zoning. Am I understanding your question?
I think we're communicating. I'm not sure. I may have to come over and chat with you later on about some of it. But the next item, H, says sale, rent, or lease, or other conveyance of one or more parts of a building, structure, or other improvements situated on one or more parcels of land. Does that mean that they can condominiumize a building on there without further review?
There are 2 exemptions for condominiums. If you have, say, an apartment building or an office building that's existing, and you wish to turn that into a condominium, you're not required to come through as a subdivision. The other exemption for condominiums is if you subdivided the land with condominiums in mind at the time. Any other situations would require that you go through subdivision review for a condominium.
But these are set in state statute.
That's right.
Mrs. Gingarelli?
Barb, under Article 4, with regard to the preliminary plat extension, I want to make sure I understand this. Did you say that under the new changes that after 3 years when a preliminary plat is 3 years old, that new conditions will be able to be added? And that's a change?
Right. That's a change. That if you go beyond the 3 years that's allowed in the state statute, say you have a 100-lot subdivision and you want to phase it over 10 years, when you come in with the phases in the 4th, 5th, 6th, or more years, council has the right to add new conditions based on adopted regulations that may have changed during that time.
Okay, and does that mean then that there is no set limit on extensions for preliminary plats, or does it identify in here somewhere that there is a limit?
Well, it would be something that would be subject to city council's approval when a developer would bring in a proposal and a phasing plan to go beyond the 3 years. It would require council's approval to go beyond that time limit. It doesn't say it can't be more than 10 or something like that, but it does require council approval, and if there are any changes to that phasing plan, they would have to come back in and get council's approval to make any changes.
Okay, and so theoretically, there could be any series of one-year extensions up and beyond 10 years even? If each successive council voted that way?
You mean an amendment to their phasing plan?
Well, for the same plat, but if a plat is held for a long period of time, not ready to build for some reason, so the council could then continue to extend that?
I suppose they could through what would be a proposal to amend the phasing plan. If you had a subdivision that came in and council approved an 8-year phasing plan, and they didn't build it for the first 7 years and came in and asked for 5 more years, that would be something where they could come in and ask council to amend the phasing plan to allow it to go to a longer time frame. And it would be up to council to decide whether they wanted to allow that amendment to the phasing plan or not.
Were these amendments to 408? Is that where these came from? I know that these are the city, but where did that come from?
That was something that I believe was addressed somewhat in the model regs, but has had some fine-tuning through the work sessions here. The idea was to try and pin down time frames versus having developers come in and ask for numerous extensions as we have had in the past. is trying to get it pinned down more, that you either keep it under the 3 years or you present a plan the council agrees to and try and stick to that.
Thank
You
you.
could look at stronger language if that seems too flexible.
Any other questions for Barb?
I have one, Dan. Barbara, I'd like to refer to the issue of amending the new regulations and ask you, since the old regulations did not have a section on amending, and since our practice in the past has been to have a public hearing before the planning board, I would assume those planning board public hearings were held because there's something in state law that requires us to review them?
There is no requirement in state law to hold a hearing before the planning board for regulation amendments.
Okay.
It's a good idea, but there's nothing specifically in state law that requires that.
So at this point, it would be a good idea for the city council to clarify whether these issues would come before the planning board on a regular basis?
On the second page of the May 20th memo, that is an issue I know that had been brought up, and it is a question that council may want to consider as far as what the role of the planning board should be in the process of amending the regulations.
Any other questions, Mrs. Gingrelli?
Barb, on page 2 of your memo of May 20th, that question on the top about the 4.5 miles versus 3, was that changed then? Was it changed to 4.5?
No, state law is 3. The 4.5 mile was a comment from Pete Meehan, which follows the building inspection jurisdiction, but state law says 3. The wording in the bold type is directly out of state statute.
Is that something that you feel would be beneficial to amend? Is there a possibility to amend that, or
To go 4.5
to go to
miles?
4.5?
Something, I guess I'd ask Jim if that is something that's possible.
State law only empowers the city to review and comment up to 3 miles. I guess if the county wanted to submit something outside of 3 miles, they could ask your advice. But the state statute in the subdivision regulations only says 3 miles. And there's been some concern on this topic in the past about why things aren't coming through here. It's the understanding of OCD that historically the council has designated them as your agent, and that's why you're not seeing these for review under the state statute. OCD understands that it's their role to act as your agent. If you want that changed, and if you want that coming through the city council, now's the time you should be giving consideration to that.
Any other questions for Ms. Martins? Mr. Bennett?
On page 33, there's a new section under density that says, in those areas where no zoning exists, the director of the OCD and the local and state health authority shall determine, in consultation with the subdivider, the overall dwelling unit density. Does this have the legislative effect of taking us out of the loop on that type of thing?
Actually, in my May 20th memo, there's a recommendation to revise that section and to put OCD and the local and state health authorities as recommending on to full council. The way the new wording would be, in those areas where no zoning exists, the director of the Office of Community Development and local and state health authorities shall recommend to the governing body in consultation with the subdivider the overall dwelling unit density, and the governing body shall approve the overall density.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Barbara? Mrs. Gingrelli?
I'm sorry, I should have addressed this before. If we wanted to explore that 3-mile issue, would the appropriate place to do that be in, would this will go to PAZ tomorrow for further comment, or since this is a public hearing?
I guess we have a couple options. It could either go to PAZ tomorrow, or I guess the other option is if we hold off and it goes to planning board and then back to PAZ. And that's up to council, I guess, to decide if you want to go ahead with it tomorrow or wait.
I don't necessarily have a problem with the 3 miles versus the 4.5, but this issue of the county, county subdivisions going directly to OCD and then the city not really being in the loop on those, what came up last year with regard to Walmart and others. And so I would just like to see some kind of a process whereby the city governing body was notified maybe at the same time that OCD was notified, so that we can answer questions to our constituents and know what's happening.
We could certainly clarify that with this phase. Now would be an appropriate time to make that clear.
Any other questions for Barbara? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to testify on these proposed revisions to the regulations? If there's not, before we close the public hearing, why don't we discuss how we would like to proceed? Mr. Reedy.
Well, it all depends on what the planning board wants to do, whether this goes to PAZ tomorrow. And seeing there's no hurry on it, if the planning board wants to take time on it, to act on it and then bring it in front of the PAZ committee a week, it wouldn't be a week from tomorrow, it'd be 2 weeks from tomorrow on account of the holiday. It's up to the planning board.
I think, Jack, if we continue the planning board public hearing until our next meeting, and you close your public hearing this evening, and then PAZ looks at it after the planning board sends a recommendation.
Does that sound all right with everyone? Mr. Sweet, did you want to say something?
I just wondered when the next meeting of the planning board was going to be.
That's June 6th, the first Tuesday of the month.
Mr. Sampson?
I don't know whether I heard you correctly or not on keeping the public hearing open.
The planning board's public hearing.
Is this an item of land use that we're not allowed to speak to anyone about after tonight if we close the public hearing?
This isn't a land use issue that affects the property owner's property rights directly. This is a general regulatory ordinance or adoption of regulations, so you can discuss this as a piece of legislation because it's a general legislative item and no specific property owner's rights are being considered.
Just wanted to be clear whether or not we could discuss it with anyone, including ourselves.
We will then close the public hearing for the City Council. The public hearing will remain open for the Planning Board, and we'll expect a recommendation from the Planning Board following your June 6th meeting. I want to thank you and all of your members for being here this evening.
Thank you for inviting us.
We'll be at ease for just a few minutes here. right, but I figure they're sent back to the regular agenda, and then they can get that sent back to committee from there. Yeah, they're on. All right. We'll reconvene the meeting. Next order of business is communications from the mayor. Council has before it this evening the executive budget, and with your permission, I would like to have time to read the mayor's message. The council, of course, has it before you, and you can read it at your leisure, but I think it's sometimes helpful for the watching and listening public to have an opportunity to do that. So I'd like to just go ahead and read that message. It'll be a chance for the council to read along, and then soon we'll get together and begin discussing the budget. If there's one single theme that characterizes this fiscal year 1995 executive budget, it's the theme of reinventing or at least reconfiguring government in the face of changing circumstances. This theme is explicitly present in the appropriation of $64,000, which is the estimated value of 1 mil from the property tax, for local government review. By the time the City Council adopts the fiscal year 95 budget, we will know whether or not our citizens have decided to undertake a review of the form of city government. For my part, I hope they do take that opportunity, simply because the task of reshaping our government to fit changing times cannot finally be accomplished within City Hall, but has to become the responsibility of the entire community. Whether we decide to elect a City Government Review Commission or not, we must move forward with a steady expansion of the coordination of services within the urban area. My administration is committed to that goal, and this budget reflects that commitment and determination in a number of ways. If we're going to have city government at all, then we must continue our efforts to bring what is, in fact, the city within our municipal boundaries. This budget anticipates the next major step in that direction by preparing for the Reserve Street annexation, which we have been discussing with that neighborhood for the last several years. The budget is built on the expectation that an annexation sufficient to attain entitlement status for federal programs will occur in December of 1994. We have sought to project revenues and expenditures 2 or 3 years into the future, and we have proposed only such additions to city staff and operations as can be covered by those revenues on a sustainable basis. With that proviso, we have proposed major additions to several departments, most especially the police department and the street division, to assure that the overall level of city services will be maintained throughout the expanded bounds of the city. A second major way in which this budget anticipates and advocates greater coordination of services within the urban area is reflected in an appropriation of $10,000 expected to be matched by an equal amount from the Missoula Rural Fire District to carry forward planning for consolidation of the two departments. Many questions remain to be answered in that process, of course, and we will invite the council's assistance in raising and answering those questions. President Harrison represents the City Council on the Fire Policy Committee, and that committee has asked both the city and the district to appropriate these funds to conduct whatever research and hire whatever facilitating services may be necessary to enable all affected parties to come to a mutually agreed upon form of consolidation. I believe that nothing less can any longer serve the needs of this growing urban area, nor the legitimate expectations of its citizens. I believe that Council President Harrison has referred a resolution to this effect that will be coming before the council in the near future. The continued growth in the urban area has been a major theme of several of my executive budgets. I'm pleased to say that with this budget, we can finally, with confidence, propose the level of coordination between city and county governments, which alone will enable us to address the challenges of growth in the way this community deserves to have them addressed. The growth management discussions between the City of Missoula and Missoula County, which the City Council has been generous enough to fund out of this year's budget, are now approaching the stage of agreement concerning what needs to be done for the next year and what resources need to be available to get that job done. While the exact magnitude of those resources has not yet been determined, this budget proposes that the city appropriate $100,000 for the effort, with the expectation of similar amounts being provided by the county and by the community at large through private channels. While the exact amount of the city's appropriation may change before final budget approval, the city's commitment to continue working with the county on this centrally important issue must remain firm. Whether the issue is local government review or fire service consolidation, growth management or annexation, the role of citizens in devising and implementing sound policies is a matter of central importance. This is, after all, a democracy, which means that citizens are the ones ultimately who must determine what course we take and what our priorities are. Beyond that, it has never been more clear that unless citizens understand what government is doing and why, they cannot and will not help it to do what they have said they want it to do. If we want to reverse the decline in public confidence in government, then we have to begin making citizens a more effective part of the government. This budget reflects that necessity in at least two ways. First, for the last several years, the strategic planning which the executive branch has undertaken has revealed a strong and steadily growing perception among most members of city staff that in order to do their jobs as well as possible, the city needs to do a better job of communicating with the public about our programs and policies. Whether we're dealing with snow removal or street sweeping or with crime or fire prevention or with bicycle safety issues, a well-informed public is a vital part of the team. Because the people who work for the city see this so clearly, they agreed that even if it required cuts in department budgets, they wanted the city's public information capacity to be put on a secure and professional footing. In the end, in order to balance the budget, we had to remove $10,000 even from this high priority item. But I urge the council to listen carefully to what departments, heads, and other staff say about why the remaining $29,000 appropriation for public information is so important to them. This reference to city staff and its workload brings us around again to the central theme of reinventing government. One of the key teachings of the now famous book by Gabler and Osborne is that in a time of little or no growth in revenues, governments must learn to do less rowing and more steering. We are at a point when our government must begin practicing that maxim. As the city has grown, as public expectations for service have grown, and perhaps above all as unfunded federal and state mandates have grown, the city's workforce has not grown in proportion to those demands, nor will it. The result, quite frankly, is that too many of our staff in too many departments are overworked, and often seriously overworked. This administration does not believe that in the long run, the public is well served by wearing out well-trained, dedicated public servants, and we are determined not to let that happen. To prevent it, we will never stop looking for ways to do things more efficiently. We will judiciously add staff, as we have in the annexation budget, when new revenues do permit us to respond to growing workloads. And in the spirit of doing more steering and less rowing, we will continue to look for ways to involve citizens more effectively in making programs work. One person who has worked too hard for a very long time is our finance officer and city clerk, Chuck Stearns, whose last City of Missoula budget is here presented. To him, for his unerring sense of duty and professionalism, we all, and all our citizens, owe a deep and genuine expression of our gratitude. This budget's proposal to split the finance director and city clerk into two positions is a little like retiring Chuck's number. It reflects a settled determination that no other person could or should even be asked to perform these two jobs at once. As usual, both the finance officer and the mayor were assisted immensely in the preparation of this very difficult budget by the careful work of our fiscal analyst, Ron Bott. Once again, I am indebted to the good, steady, and also always cheerful assistance of Chief Administrative Officer Mary Walsh. And this year, more than ever before, I have to express my gratitude to all department heads and all their staffs for their cooperation and spirit of teamwork in submitting budgets which were genuinely responsive to the very difficult fiscal situation we face at this time. Without their dedication, this budget would not be what it now is, a document of which I feel proud to submit to the Council's deliberation and to for your disposition. I do look forward to working with the Council on this budget, and I now turn it over to you, Mr. President, and we will be at your service. We'll go to comments of City Council members. President Harrison.
I had the privilege to attend the celebration of Frontier Days at Fort Missoula this Saturday. Bob Brown and the staff at the Historical Museum did an excellent job of coordinating this event, and I appreciate their efforts. I also had the opportunity to attend the Virginia Worth Spring Dance Recital on Sunday. Hundreds of people packed the University Theater as children and young adults performed their dance routines. It was fun, it was good for the community, and I may take up tap dancing, you don't know.
Mr. Hermes.
Last week there was a street project done connecting the sewer lines to the new departments near Russell Street in southwest Higgins. Traffic Monday morning at about 7 o'clock was detoured to Simons and over to High Park, then down to Higgins. Motorists adjusted during the week going to 23rd and Garrett and Simons, but Monday morning there was great confusion by motorists. I saw bus drivers backing up Hillview and U-turning in the middle of the street. There was a parade of cars stalled on Simons trying to get onto High Park in the morning. One suggestion that I'd make for future projects would not to be to start the detour until 8:30 or 9 on that Monday morning if it starts on a Monday. This would allow the morning traffic to get through and let people see that there's a project going in so they could adjust the next day. I also think closing one lane of traffic might be another idea. Several residents called me and objected to the heavy traffic detour and felt their children that were going to school were put in danger. Another suggestion on this would be to send a postcard to the affected street people where the detour would be a day or two before the detour so they could adjust their schedules and the schedule of their children. On a somewhat related matter, it seems that motorists are going as fast as ever or faster than ever on Whitaker, High Park, Hillview, Patty Canyon. Those are a few areas where the speed limit should be enforced by the police, and I'd ask them to take a note on that when the nice weather's out. I think people are going a little faster this time of year. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Mr. Horton.
I'd like to comment on two items tonight. One is on perceived parity in Missoulian political columns. There are two candidates running for the Democratic county commissioner seat, and this will essentially be the election because there is no Republican running. One candidate had his personal column run with a parallel column about the most scandalized president in my memory, The other candidate had her column run with a parallel column right next to the most popular lady of the 20th century, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And I would just suggest that people be aware of subliminal suggestion and subliminal influence. The second item I'd like to comment about is that the citizens of Missoula should be aware of the process which will begin in a couple of weeks, or potentially begin in a couple of weeks, if they elect to review their form of government. They should be very serious about safeguarding their elected neighborhood representatives. And I don't care whether this is a council or whether it's somebody else or whether it's us, but you should have elected neighborhood representatives. Beware of any situation which allows an executive officer to appoint a council at large, because then you have no representation.
Mr. Reedy.
I'm going to have to take an awful good look at consolidation of fire departments. The city fire department is just but 2 brand new fire stations up at the city taxpayers' expense. We have a first-rate fire department, rural fire department. Well, a fine fire department is far from being in the same league, both financially or otherwise, and mostly because we annex part of their things. I'm not going to go for any kind of consolidation where the taxpayers, the city taxpayers in Missoula, bail out somebody else at the city taxpayers' expense, and I'll fight it to the bitter end.
Mr. Sampson.
I agree with what Jack is saying. We've talked consolidation before. I think fairly recently, like within the last year, there's an Attorney General's opinion regarding consolidation, I think, that you asked for. And I think tossing a batch of money to bail that situation out is wrong. But we'll argue that at a later time, probably. Apparently I'm no longer on the policy planning portion of that. I was appointed by Mayor Lovegrove before I was president of the council, but you can appoint whoever you wish to do so on that.
Al, my reading on that is that that appointment is up to the council president, and Mr. Harrison made the appointment. We can go back and look at the document, but I did not make the appointment. That's a council president's appointment.
Well, I was appointed, I know, or at least served on that under Mayor Lovegrove, and had continuously up until I thought now, but apparently not now on it. But nevertheless, see where Mike Kress has chosen to move on to the Missoula Transit Company. Mike, I think, served us very well. I think without a doubt he was the best director of OCD that we had while I've been on the council on it, and he chose to step down, but I'm sorry to see him go. I think he was good for us. And I guess the other is happy birthday to Anne Mary.
Mr. Sweet.
A couple of weeks ago, I attended the Missoula Trout Unlimited banquet, and didn't get to comment about that last week because we didn't have a council comment period, but it was a very good banquet. A lot of money was raised to protect trout fishery throughout western Montana. It's a very good cause. There was a lot of conversation regarding the proposed gold mine for Lincoln and what effect that will have on the Blackfoot River. I also want to once again express my outrage at the public comment period coming so late in the meeting. I think it should be moved back. And I'd like to wish Bob Dylan a happy birthday. His birthday's Tuesday. I think I'll spend part of Tuesday listening to Blonde on Blonde, and that's a 2-record album, so I'll probably be about an hour and a half listening to that thing, but it's well worth it.
Mrs. Shea.
Quite a diversity in comments tonight. I'm glad I'm following because I can pick up on everybody's remarks.
Good luck to Mike Kress. I'm glad that Al Sampson brought up Mike's resignation from OCD. Mike has had lots of work to do here at the city, and he was always non-controversial. And because he was part of the planning department, that was, I think that was, is something that I will always remember. He did a good job. He will take his expertise and competencies and great personality. He's just a good person to Mountain Line, and I know that they will be able to take advantage of that, and he'll be a excellent presence there. I'm very pleased to hear about the joint work between consolidation of the fire departments for the rural and the city department. This is something that Mike Bennett, before he was on council, and myself, while I've been on council, have worked very hard toward. Both departments actually have supporters and want to work together, and there's a great commonality there. What's wonderful is that people benefit by increased safety, I think, and having people who are jointly trained and understand how to serve the public, and probably a tax savings as well. I look forward to those discussions. I know that they will be controversial and something that I hope the public will be involved in as well. I want to just say a little bit about the changes they're shaking out as the FCC is setting down some second guidelines and second rules with respect to cable regulation. Although 11,000 cable systems did roll back the rates a year or so ago, many of those who did not or did not roll them back enough will be decreasing those rates. But don't hold your breath. I'm not sure that subscribers are really going to see anything too significant. The decreases will probably be on the modest side, about 7% or a little bit less. At a minimum, subscribers should have 30 days notice before cable rates are increased. The downside of this is that a year-long rate freeze will be lifted, although cable operators really are going to have to justify what their costs have been business-wise and inflationary costs, so that they have to fill out intricate forms before they pass that cost along to consumers. So I think this will be interesting. Some people may even see some rate increases. I hope not, but I'm never quite sure when it comes to the new partnership that municipalities and the FCC is undertaking. Also, just a special tribute in memorial to all the veterans and people who have served in the name of this country as we approach Memorial Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I also wanted to briefly speak in support of the idea of trying to improve our emergency services. I don't think it's important what color the truck is, what uniform the people have on. We have to remember we're dealing with people in need here, and the important thing is how we best take care of those people in need, regardless of what taxing district they happen to be in. On a lighter note, last week, Craig Sweet asked me if I would do a lip sync for Bob Dylan in honor of the birthday, and fortunately for everyone here, I declined.
Well, we've actually got Doug Harrison offering to tap dance now while you do it, so it's getting better all the time. Ms. Rosenleaf.
I also want to extend my thanks to Mike Kress as he leaves our service from the city. He's been an excellent city employee, and I'm sure we'll miss him a great deal. The bulk of my comments are regarding the North Side access and the ongoing difficulty for North Side citizens to reach the downtown business district, and for those of us who live on this side of the track to reach the north side. It's been 2 years since we held a public hearing ordering in a grade level crossing linking the north side with the rest of Missoula and alleviating this isolation and accompanying blight that has occurred on the north side. We had a North Side Access Solution Group that had North Side representatives, Montana Rail Link representatives, City Council and administration working together for just over a year to develop a solution report, and that work included a design charrette meeting with design, architect, engineering specialists, professionals in the community. The council adopted that last summer. And it recommended 2 crossings for bicycles and pedestrians, one at grade level down near the farmers market area, and an overpass linking the neighborhood to the west side, just west of here a bit. And we requested at that time that federal air quality mitigation funds and matching city funds be used to design and construct solutions to this problem that isolates the north side from the central city and the city from the north side. We referred that to the Transportation Advisory Committee. We haven't heard anything about that in a long time, and we had hoped that within a year we'd be moving forward with at least the grade level crossing, which is a relatively simple engineering solution. So I would ask that the administration look into the status of that crossing solution moving forward and let us know where it sits and if we need to do something with the neighborhood or with the council to move that project along. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. My recollection is that that actually was placed on the priority list, and I think that it's fairly secure there. We don't have any further word from the federal government, but we may ask Bruce for a little bit of an update at staff comment time. Thank you. Ms. Tracy.
I'd just like to congratulate all those who worked on a very successful bike walk week for Missoula that was organized by local businesses, organizations, the University of Montana Core students, city staff, and Mountain Line. It was a week of programs to promote healthy transportation in our community, and special kudos to Karen Jaworski, our bicycle pedestrian coordinator, who coordinated the week's events. But a special bravo to all of our neighbors who tried another way to get around Missoula and continue to try to make some of their trips on foot, by bike, by bus, and by carpool. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Mrs. Gingarelli.
Thanks for mentioning the north side crossing, Kelly. I was coming back from Coeur d'Alene last night and had to go under the Orange Street underpass and noticed about 10 lights out and was wondering about what's happening there, so I'm glad you brought it up. The Planning Policy Committee has met twice in the last 7 days to review OCD's fiscal year 95 work program and their budget enhancements, and the committee is working very well together on some of the information we've been discussing, and we'll be running some of that by the Growth Management Working Group, which meets again this Friday from 9 to 12 here in City Hall. Janet Stevens and Doris Fisher have done a wonderful job working together, presenting some of these enhancements, and I'd like to just say to the council that I'm very impressed with what some of the enhancements are. I think that they reflect a real concern with the kinds of nuts and bolts information that OCD really needs, mapping, getting some comprehensive maps together, developing a zoning atlas, and doing an organizational analysis of OCD, among many other things. But I was impressed with the kind of approach that the team has taken in putting those together. And last night I returned from Coeur d'Alene. I was in Coeur d'Alene over the weekend, and I noticed that as soon as I crossed the Idaho state line into Montana, I was immediately barraged with tons of ugly billboards. And noticing that Idaho must have, and I'm not sure if this is the case or not, but it seems to me that they might have some kind of an ordinance or regulatory approach to highway billboards, and it's amazing the difference in the feel of riding through Idaho compared to getting into Montana. We have the same beautiful scenery, but a lot of it is obliterated by the consistently hideous billboards. So I hope we can at some point do something about that.
Thank you, Chris. Mrs. Craig.
I want to say something about the open space bond issue. I have a pamphlet here I'm going to read just a little bit from. Missoula County is blessed with some of the most beautiful land in the country and some of the most threatened. Because Missoula County is such a beautiful, quiet, and safe place to live, people are moving here. Before it's too late, we need to set aside some of our scenic views, river trails, parks, and wildlife habitat. That way, future generations will still be able to walk along clean rivers, watch elk and deer grazing on open hills, and play in open, safe parks. Such assets will benefit the community and economy. We owe it to the future to act now. The open space bond issue will allow us to save some of Missoula County's best lands before they are gobbled up by a growing population and gone forever. For less than $2 a month, we can protect our open space and keep Missoula from losing its quality of life as so many other places have. If you want to get involved in the campaign, call Richard Smith or Bob McKelvey or Richard Gottschalk or call me and I'll point you in the right direction. Happy birthday, Anne Mary. And on the lighter side, last night about this time I caught a 4.5-pound rainbow trout.
Wow, congratulations. Jack?
I want to apologize to some of my veteran friends because I had meant to ask the mayor to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance because of Memorial Day, and it slipped my mind, and it was just I just plain forgot about it. I want to salute all the veterans, both living and dead, and I didn't really forget you, just didn't get a hold of the mayor.
Thank you, Jack. All these references to Bob Dylan and Anne Mary's birthday remind me, I think the reason that people like to celebrate Bob Dylan's birthday is because of his unique view of the passing of time memorialized in the line, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. It's the way to think about birthdays. We'll go on now to committee reports. Administration and Finance Committee. Mr. Sampson.
Yeah, the first is the item that came back from the consent agenda. Committee recommends the council adopt a resolution of intention to declare certain City of Missoula property radios as surplus and authorizing transfer to Missoula County Animal Control and Sheriff and to Sentinel High School. And I would so move. The allocation on that came out of committee was for 6 of them to Animal Control and 4 to the Sheriff's Office. And checking with Ellen Leahy, why the indication was that the Animal Control only needed 4, so the balance would go to the Sheriff's Office. So the allocation with that motion now would be 4 to Animal Control and the balance of 6 to the Sheriff's Office, and the other allocations the same as before.
Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of oh, it's a resolution. All right, we'll have a roll call vote. Is there any public comment? Roll call.
On the resolution as amended, Craig. Yes. Gingarelli. Yes. Harrison.
Yes.
Hermes.
Yes.
Horton.
Yes.
Reedy.
Yes.
Rosenleaf. Yes. Sampson.
Yes.
Shea.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
Tracy.
Yes.
Bennett.
Yes.
Resolution passes 12-0.
Next to a motion regards claims. The committee recommends the council authorize the Administration and Finance Committee to approve claims at its next meeting, as there will not be a council meeting on May 30th, subject to the ratification of the June 6th council meeting, and I would so move.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. Mr. Sampson.
Next, the committee recommends the council approve claims totaling $237,035.94, and I would so move.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries.
And a report.
Cable TV Committee, Mrs. Shea.
This is about the resolution setting guidelines for purchasing cable television programming services. I would make a motion to adopt the resolution setting guidelines for purchasing cable television programming services as amended by the committee at prior meetings. And I would so move. I'd like to also speak to this motion.
Mrs. Shea.
For those of you who have followed, this process has been very interesting. It looks quite simple on the surface, but there's actually been a lot of people who have participated, they've been involved, and the resolution is very different now than it was in the beginning. And I want to thank the council members who have participated and helped out, Bob Hermes especially, and especially the Cable Television Committee members. And I don't want to forget MCAT and the Missoula Chamber of Commerce and the local producers who got together and the commercial producers, because I don't think at the onset I would have expected that to happen. But they did come together, they communicated and met 2 or 3 times. They have decided that they were going to meet quarterly because they didn't have perhaps as much communication about each other, or even information about each other that they had originally thought. So this has been a collaborative effort. What we didn't have, for the council's memory, is we didn't have a policy on how to purchase television programming services. when the city wanted to produce an educational video, that policy wasn't written down. Now we have a policy. It speaks to the public information task force that the city would have in place, and the city does have in place. It clarifies some of the terms like personal financial gain. In addition to that, there is a third-party agreement for paid producers that the MCAT board has discussed and accepted. It clarifies marketing potential. Actually, pre-production plans will be posted on a bulletin board at MCAT for 7 days in advance, and MCAT will notify all independent and commercial producers. The producers would then have to come in and look at the bulletin board and meet with independent producers if they're interested. That will happen for 1 week so that commercial producers would have the advantage if they're interested in participating or interested in bidding on that project. That third-party agreement is one that we're not responsible for. That's MCAT's, but it is really complementary to the resolution that you're looking at, and they both work together hand in glove. This resolution reflects the input from private and commercial producers, and that was something that really needed to be clarified before. The Finance Committee asked the Cable Television Committee to come up with a policy. That's what we've done. There are several people here who can answer questions about this. I'm very pleased with the end result of the process and the process itself, and I just want to thank everyone who assisted.
Any further discussion? Mr. Harris.
I just want to have a couple of things clarified just for my information. In paragraph 5, does paragraph 5 basically say that if city funds are used to fund a production, or if city equipment is used, and the city retains the copyright or the right to the copyright? Is that kind of it in a nutshell?
Copyright is negotiated on a case-by-case basis. That is, the city, if the city wants to have something produced, that it will negotiate that copyright, and it is the responsibility of the city to negotiate that copyright on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, but it says if the city desires it, then they'll retain that copyright.
And that was the feeling of the committee, that we would want the city to have the copyright. This is an area that was never really written down before, and quite frankly, I'm not sure if the city does have a copyright for the things that have been produced by the city before with city funding, but this specifies how that will be done.
Okay, does that also include if just city equipment is used? I mean, because it seems to me like the original intention of this resolution was to get rid of, it's not really get rid of competition, but to make the competitive process on a more even playing field. So that's what I'm after is, was it with city equipment that the city would retain copyright to, or just the paid production if funded it?
I'm not sure I completely understand your question, but I think I do. If we're talking about MCAT equipment, then that is all city-owned equipment, and copyright would be negotiated on a case-by-case basis anytime the city is soliciting a production that it wants to see produced, a video, for example.
Mr. Horton.
I'm not sure how this varies from the creation of an art-type copyright, but the copyright is automatically created when the piece is created, and that copyright can only be divested by a direct signing over by the creator. Although in art law there is provision for paying for service, paying for having something created, in which case generally the payer retains the copyright. I don't know whether that's relevant here or not.
Mrs. Shea.
Well, two things. One, and Doug addressed this, there was a perception that when the city wanted to have something produced, that we might be in competition with people out in the community who were not using city-owned equipment or MCAT-owned equipment, and so we wanted to make sure that the competition angle was addressed. And secondly,
For example, if the fire department wants a video about fire training, the committee's intention was that that would be owned by the city, and that there would be no marketing potential for that from anyone else except for the city. And so the marketing potential is also addressed. It's addressed specifically in the third-party agreement that a profit cannot be made on any production. That a person could recoup costs that were expended, but not beyond that. And so that's an additional part of that.
Ms. Rosenleaf.
In this paragraph regarding the copyright, it does refer to using city-owned equipment, but then it goes on to say that the city council desires that the city shall retain the copyright for any production paid for with city funds. So in response to Doug's concerns, I think it is more broadly, if the city were to obtain a production with an organization other than MCAT, that it's still the council's desire that they negotiate to retain the copyright. And in response to Curtis's comments, the organization I work for has obtained video services in the past, and we have negotiated and it's been part of our payment to own the copyright of those productions, and it is something you just do contractually. And I think if you don't do it, that it would stay with the artist, in this case a video producer.
Mr. Sampson.
I'm not sure whether I understand all of this in 5 and also in 3 up there. That if I understand what they're saying here is that a producer may produce a program. The program probably would be copyright owned by the city, although it could be negotiated out of it. But he could go ahead, or he or she could go ahead and use that and sell it, and any monies that he received would not be considered as personal financial gain. But I don't know for sure whether Uncle Sam would agree with that with the IRS or not. If you go out in business and sell stuff, even if this contract says so, I would think that might be considered as personal gain.
I'm assuming that it's only for purposes of our policy that we're defining personal financial gain.
But I thought that was what we were trying to do, is to keep people from competing out in the private industry, and personal financial gain, I guess, is what competition is about.
Mrs. Shea?
I think each of us addresses that in these 2 documents. The third-party agreement specifically, it's that first small paragraph under the agreement warrants that all parties understand that. The last sentence there says, income from such sales may not exceed the cost of the production. One of the concerns was, and Al is correct in speaking about this, is that, for example, the International Choral Festival was one particular event that someone could go out and take MCAT equipment and film it and then sell all those and make a profit. That, in fact, did not happen. There were videos sold, but they did not recoup the costs. So income from those kind of sales, if there is marketing potential, and I think that will be probably something that will be investigated before every pre-proposal is planned. If there is marketing potential, that income from sales cannot be, that would be the personal financial gain. That may not exceed the cost of the production, so that, for example, if the same thing that Kelly talked about, if Child Care Resources wanted to go out and produce a video and contract with MCAT to do that, we could not make money on that production. We could recoup the cost, but we would not be allowed, if we were contracting with MCAT, to do that. Just in a broad view, I think what's important about this is not only that these 2 documents clarify some of that terminology that was not clarified at all before, but that they fit together, and that the commercial producers and small production firms will have first crack at any contracts if they're interested for a week. and the commercial producers and MCAT and and Mike Jaworski of the Chamber of Commerce got together and ironed that one out on their own. And just wanted to explain that part.
Further council discussion. Mr. Harrison.
I just had one more question. One, it deals with the last paragraph on the first page, but actually the end of that paragraph, which is the top of the second page. It goes through all this, names all these people that you can retain services from, and then it says to do business within the city limits pursuant to a competitive quote process. And I was wondering, is there a competitive quote process set up to where it levels out the playing field, to where the cost of equipment's put into a competitive bid?
Mrs. Shea?
Jim can probably explain this a little better than I can. It's actually not a competitive bid. It's rather an informal bid process, but it is competitive in that the Public Information Task Force would send out the information about the proposal to commercial and non-commercial producers and anyone who is interested in the community. We might have a city employee who had the time and the expertise and had been through the MCAT training and could do it, but probably that's not the case. So the city would be contracting with somebody about that. If it's MCAT-owned equipment, then the producer, the third-party producer, would have to pay 15% back to MCAT. That is included in there, and I think that addresses some of the part of the level playing field, because that 15% is almost kind of like a rental fee, and that goes back into MCAT, and that's part of. I think that some commercial producers did not know that MCAT producers had to pay that back in, and that's also a way for MCAT to be able to take care of the equipment and to purchase new equipment and just do the maintenance on the equipment that they have.
Mr. Horton?
I appreciate the time and effort that Elaine has put into this, although I think probably here we're talking about two separate issues. One is the requirement for rental fees of equipment to go into a fund to replace equipment as it needs replacement. The other is a parity for the private sector to not have to compete with people who are trained at public expense and using public equipment. And I think that's the issue that it appears that some of us are not clear on. And again, I appreciate the work that's gone into consolidating this, but I'm still not quite clear about how this parity will be reached.
Ms. Rosenleaf?
Well, let me just say that the Chamber of Commerce convened meetings with MCAT and commercial for-profit producers in the community to work out this language and to bring understanding among for-profit producers and MCAT staff regarding how these productions are generated and that kind of thing. And emerging from those meetings with the Chamber of Commerce facilitating those discussions, and I don't think there's any question that the Chamber of Commerce's agenda is to assure that private enterprise has a level playing field and is comfortable. And they walked away from those meetings comfortable with the revisions in this policy and comfortable having had input into the third-party agreement for paid producers that is an MCAT policy. So I really feel that those concerns have been addressed. Many of the things that the city will want to do are not going to be commercially viable because we simply are not going to have the money to pay what it costs to do some of these things at the level of a commercial production, nor are many of the things we do needed for commercial purposes. They're more internal training films, and therefore production qualities don't need to be as high and so on, and therefore we can get by with a lesser cost product. Then my final point is that, in fact, the city owns this equipment as it owns backhoes, as it owns a sign shop, as it owns other things for the city to pay, city residents to pay some much higher fee for the use of equipment when we own this equipment, I think is a bad use of taxpayers' money, and therefore we'd like to take advantage of this equipment that we do own.
Mr. Harris.
We want to make sure that there's a real difference between people using our backhoes and people using this camera equipment. I don't have a problem with trying this out. It seems pretty complicated to me, some of the wording, like the term in paragraph 3, the last sentence, the term personal financial gain is not meant to apply to any fees paid to producers working under third-party agreements as defined. Some of that is difficult for me in some ways because I'm not sure exactly what that means. I don't know if there's public financial gain, I'm not sure, but there's I think it's kind of, some of this is kind of hard, but I'm willing to try and see what works out from it.
Mr. Horton.
Because this is reviewable each time the contract is up, I think probably we're going to have to move forward with it. Although I think it's a real inappropriate analogy comparing city-funded training and city-funded equipment to backhoes, because we would not train individuals at city expense on our backhoes and then allow them to borrow those backhoes and go compete with the private sector, which had funded the purchase of the backhoes.
Any further discussion? Mr. Shea.
Mr. Sweet, did you have a comment first? Oh, okay. I think maybe there's something that is overriding here, and that is that a number of years ago, this city invested in the concept of community access television. I don't want to exclude community access television from anything that it ought to be involved in. I don't want to exclude the private sector either. I think they're trying to work together, and that's real positive. But any time that the city needs to use and would benefit from using community access television with all of its paraphernalia is exactly what I'm going to support. Because that's something that we bought into, maybe not this council, but former council members many years ago. And I don't want to make it tough on them because I think that they have a job to do, and we've entrusted them to do a job, and it's a concept that benefits the community in terms of government programming, educational programming, and community access. And it's all of those things, and I like the diversity. And so this is just one step forward for all of us to be able to work together.
Further discussion? Is there any public comment? Mr. Ammons.
Real briefly, Randy Ammon, Executive Director at MCAT, 257 South Easy Street, just emphasizing that MCAT staff, board members, and producers did in fact meet with representatives of the private sector, video production companies, including Productions West, Far West, and KECI TV. We're very thankful to Mike Jaworski from the Chamber for facilitating that. We had lengthy meetings. We spent a lot of time on the issues of copyright and on the MCAT third-party policy, as well as the city resolution. And we stayed there and met several times till we worked out a consensus. And the way this resolution is now written, the way that MCAT voluntarily revised its third-party agreement is to everyone's liking. And it was a good, productive session, and it bodes well for the future. The dialogue between the private sector and MCAT, we're all for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
I'm Kenneth E. Haugen, H-A-U-G-E-N, 1831 Stoddard here in Missoula. The last time that I spoke before the council, I got pretty mad. I'll tell you why. After I sat down after my little speak here at the podium, I thought Channel 13 cameraman had put his TV camera on me. And I thought, well, gee, maybe I'll be on the news speaking out about Department of Family Services. So So I watched 10 o'clock news, and who did they have on? Snodgrass and his running feud with the city council. And I phoned Larry Frost the next day, and I asked him who he thought was more important, Snodgrass or the children of Montana.
Mr. Haugen, I need to remind you that we have before us a resolution regarding use of MCAT equipment, and that's what I've called for public comment on. We'll have the regular public comment period a little while later. Sorry.
I get so
but
shook up, I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, you hang tight here, and
Okay.
we'll get to you, okay? Any other public comment on this resolution?
As far as MCAT competing with private enterprise,
So we
Dan Poe Newman, Post Office Box 9331, Missoula, Montana. As far as MCAT competing with KPAX, that's 8, or any other private enterprise well-established, I think that it's pretty ludicrous to think that somebody learning to go before the public using MCAT facilities would be much competition. As far as private production companies, you might consider that there are other people that use, that do provide services comparable to MCAT, and where the size is compatible, there may be some question there. But as far as grounds of a news station or a multi-million-dollar outfit being competed with MCAT, that's really quite minor, I would think. But not to discourage people from training others for pay to do what MCAT is doing. So basically what I am trying to say is that you have here valid arguments on both sides, but do understand that what MCAT's doing is something that's for everybody. It's for people with and without money, and those people should not be denied services based on arguments mainly provided by very large outfits.
Thank you. Any other public comment? If not, we'll go on with a roll call vote on the resolution.
Gingarelli. Harrison. Hermes. Horton.
Yes.
Reedy.
No.
Rosenleaf. Sampson.
Pass.
Shea.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
Tracy.
Yes.
Bennett.
Yes.
Craig. Would the past care to change his vote?
No change.
No change. Resolution passes 10-1 with 1 pass, Reedy voting no and Sampson passing.
Next is the Conservation Committee. This is Craig.
The committee recommends the council approve the forestry internship agreement according to the University of Montana Resource Management Program for urban forestry during the period of June 1994 to September 1994, with a maximum of 600 hours, and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement, and I would so move.
Is there any discussion? Mr. Bennett.
Well, I thought maybe Mike could answer my question there when she said $600, but I think it's 600 hours in the authorization. I'd asked the question earlier what the total dollar amount was. I was wondering if anyone here could address that for me.
Does the contract itself, does anybody know, does it have a limit in it?
I feel it's already been budgeted. It's in the budget for this year.
Apparently there is not a dollar limit on it. Ms. Rosenleaf?
Is there an hourly rate? See it in the contract, but do we have an hourly rate that we typically pay practicum students?